I'm here with Natasha Fielding from Argus Media to talk about European gas and LNG. There's quite a lot going on in the market, and we are lucky to be able to have a conversation and get some quick takes from an expert in the field. So perhaps we could start by just hearing about who you are and your background, please.
Thank you very much, Bill, and thanks for having me on. I look after our European gas, LNG, and biomass coverage at Argus Media, which is a price reporting agency. So we cover the European gas and LNG markets from a news, analysis, and pricing point of view. I've been at Argus for 9 years, and in that time, most of that has been spent looking at the European gas markets, initially with a focus on Northwest Europe, and then more recently looking into Central and Southeast European gas markets.
Great. So there's a lot going on at the moment. Maybe we'll start on the Central and Southeast European. As I understand, the EU has now brought in legislation or rubber stamped its regulation to phase out Russian pipeline gas. I think some people listening, not everyone, but might be sort of surprised that Russian pipeline gas is still coming into Europe. So perhaps you could just explain what's going on with Russian pipeline gas and LNG into Europe at the moment.
Yeah, so the amount of Russian pipeline gas that's getting into Europe now it must be said, is a fraction of what was sent over before the war in Ukraine started in 2022. But still, Europe gets about 5% of its gas as pipelined through from Russia. And Europe also gets LNG, liquefied natural gas, from Russia still. That pipeline gas is flows through the Turkish Stream pipeline under the Black Sea and initially enters Bulgaria before entering other markets like Hungary, Slovakia, Greece, the Balkan markets.
And where does the LNG come into? And where does it come from? Is it coming from Arctic too? Is it coming from other Russian
Uh,
LNG facilities?
yeah, so the LNG is coming from the Yamal liquefaction plant, and it comes into various LNG import terminals in Europe.
Okay. And perhaps you could just talk about the regulation to phase out Russian pipeline gas and what's this, if 5% is still quite meaningful. So how's this going to affect markets, do you think? And particularly, I guess, in those kind of central and southeast areas, southeast parts of Europe that are getting that Russian pipeline gas.
Yeah, so we're not talking about a huge chunk of Europe's gas supply like we were back in 2022. So this won't be something that causes an absolutely massive shift in the European gas markets. However, it is still a meaningful bit of supply. And the biggest impact will be on those Southeast European gas markets that are still getting the Russian gas. So primarily Hungary, Slovakia. These markets will have to get alternatives. And particularly Hungary and Slovakia, they are landlocked countries. So getting LNG into those markets is not quite as straightforward as if you have a coastline and an LNG terminal. So it's those Central Eastern European markets that are most impacted, but indirectly you also have an impact on a market like Germany, which sits in the center of Europe and where more gas will have to flow out from Germany, out from those underground gas storage sites and into Eastern European markets.
So who are going to be the beneficiaries of this change in the regulation? Would you say?
Well, I guess there's a clear security of supply element to this regulation. Europe has seen what happens when there's over-reliance on a single supplier. So phasing out Russian gas, I mean, it's in line with the EU's political aims, and of course, for for Northwest Europe, that phase out from Russian gas has actually already happened in 2022, rather forcibly in most cases. So for those markets, the phase out has already been completed.
Great. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think quite a big change, certainly for those markets. Could we just move on to gas storage and underground gas storage? And I understand that levels are quite low at the moment. We're in February, so winter's very much not ended. But I'd just love to get your take on where storage levels are, and just perhaps give a short bit of background about, why this is important, what the European regulations are on this issue, and what the ramifications of the market of low storage levels might be.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting winter for Europe in terms of underground gas storage levels. We started out the winter with underground gas stocks at their lowest since the 2022 energy crisis began. And then we've seen strong drawdowns from storage this winter. I mean, the big reason for that is that we've had some spells of cold weather that we hadn't had in previous winters. So we now have a situation where underground gas stocks could end this winter at their lowest since 2018. So we've got historically
Wow.
low levels. It's really, and it's quite a turnaround from the last couple of winters where we ended the winter with more gas in storage. So I guess you could think about the ramifications of this across two time periods. First, we have to get through the rest of the winter. Um, it doesn't look at the moment like there are any big cold snaps on the horizon, which will make it easier for Europe to kind of get by fairly easily on the storage that the gas installed that it already has. Though of course that can change. I mean, if weather forecasts out 3, 4 weeks don't have a very high degree of accuracy. So on the one hand, we have to get through the rest of the winter on the storage we already have. And then perhaps the bigger challenge will be restocking ahead of next winter, adding considerably more gas to storage in order to build up for the next heating season. Europe, so the EU does have, you mentioned there the regulations, the EU does have storage filling regulations to make sure that we have that buffer ahead of the winter. But those regulations were relaxed last year, so to add more flexibility, so we don't need to hit as high fill levels now as we used to.
And do countries comply with the regulations even if they've been relaxed, and are the regulations enforced?
That's a really good question. It's something that people in the gas market are thinking a lot about. And the answer is so far there haven't really been consequences for countries that have missed their their storage filling requirements either at an EU or a national level. As one example, Denmark, which has relatively little gas storage capacity and actually has its own domestic production in the North Sea. Denmark missed its filling targets 2 years in a row. As far as we can see, there were no consequences, no penalties for Denmark. So there is a question about enforceability and about the willingness of the European Commission and also national governments to make sure that those regulations are, the requirements are actually met.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, look, thank you very much for coming and having a talk with us. We do short, quick takes here at Enco, and the two fascinating areas, both feeding into each other. I think the cutting off of Russian supplies will be fairly meaningful for those markets, right? And the storage level question is one that will keep on keeping everyone busy and keeping analysts busy. So yeah, thank you very much for your time with us.
Thanks so much for having me.